Well, ladies and gentlemen, the deal is finally done. The PFL now owns Bellator. Viacom sold it for under $100 million. Don Davis made the announcement earlier this week on the MMA Hour that the deal is finally official. But what does it all mean? I mean, I'm sure everybody's already seen tons of talk about, it doesn't really mean a whole lot. The UFC is still king, and that is true for the moment, but this is still a very, very big deal. I mean, the number 2 and 3 companies being put together is a monumental deal, especially in the MMA world, whenever the UFC has such dominant control over the industry. I mean, taking a look at the UFC and their roster, it doesn't really take a rocket scientist to figure out that, yes, they have by far the best talent in the world, especially when you look at the top level of the company. Guys like Islam Makhachev, guys like Charles Oliveira, guys like Alexander Volkanovski. But at the same time, I mean, we can't really say that Bellator and PFL don't have world-class talent. Obviously, Kayla Harrison is one of the bigger stars that come out of the PFL, but names such as Brandon Loughnane, Clay Collard are legitimately some of the most entertaining guys over in that company. And then you add in the fact that they have gotten guys like Jake Paul now. They have guys like Francis Ngannou. That was already going to put PFL in a position to where they could potentially challenge for a portion of the UFC's market share going into 2024. And now this Bellator deal is only going to make that even of an easier task for them. Because while Bellator has struggled a lot over the last few years in terms of getting attention, in terms of getting press, they haven't really struggled in terms of talent. In fact, I'd argue that Bellator's roster right now is arguably the best that it's ever been. It goes without saying, but guys like the Pitbull brothers, guys like AJ McKee, even some of the older stars that they have, like Chris Cyborg and Ryan Bader, are legitimately entertaining fighters that have helped boost Bellator's stock over the last few years. But what is the major issue that Bellator has had? It's honestly not in terms of talent. Like I said, their talent in their roster is phenomenal. It's really a problem of getting attention and getting press. And a big part of that is the fact that Viacom has been looking to dump Bellator for a while. I mean, we've heard that this PFL deal has been in the works for the majority of this year. There were a lot of starts, there were a lot of stops, but in the end, they got the deal done. And moving forward, what does it mean? Well, it comes at a time whenever the UFC is arguably in their worst position that they've been in a very long time. Obviously, guys like John Jones are on the way out. I mean, it goes without saying, but a lot of their stars are starting to get older. They're starting to retire. Now, that doesn't mean that they don't have stars of the future already in the waiting, but even guys like Alex Bahia, who have kind of risen up over the last, year or two, he's already in his mid-30s. You know what I'm saying? And that's not even getting into the fact that the UFC is going to trial, more than likely, next spring. The UFC's antitrust lawsuit is something that's not being discussed enough, if at all. MMA On Point and a few other channels have done a great job at kind of breaking it down, but essentially the UFC, due to their contracts and due to the market control they have, I mean, they've bought out essentially every competitor that they've had, with the exception of Bellator. I mean, we can go through it, but Strikeforce was bought out by them. They went ahead and bought out the WEC. They bought out Pride. Because of that, they are now essentially a monopoly. PFL is trying to make that not the case, but at the same time, it's already been found in federal court that, the UFC is 100% a monopoly. So federal courts right now are looking at having the UFC change their contracts, but more importantly, paying out upwards of $1 billion to fighters who competed from 2010 to 2017. Now, the exact dates I don't have right in front of me right now, but essentially that 7-year span, if you fought in the UFC, you are eligible for a payout, potentially, if this goes to trial, which more than likely it will next year. So, with all that being the case, what does that mean for the PFL? Well, the PFL is not exactly doing too hot. I mean, I'm sure that anybody that's seen their ratings or seen how their first pay-per-view did last year can see that. But at the same time, going out and getting Bellator gives them the opportunity to challenge the UFC. Not really in terms of market share, at least not yet. But at the same time, the acquisition of guys like Jake Paul, like Francis Ngannou, is going to make that much, much easier. Believe it or not, having two of the biggest stars on the planet from combat sports in your company is going to make that a lot easier. But at the same time, now they're actually getting good fighters. No offense to a lot of the current PFL crop out there, but let's be honest, there is a massive drop-off in talent from the UFC to Bellator to even the PFL. The PFL has a lot of guys winning the tournaments over there who, flunked out of the UFC, for lack of a better term. But guys like AJ McKee, guys like the Pitbull brothers are going to come in, and even Johnny Eblen. Now, granted, PFL doesn't have a middleweight division right now, but bringing these guys in is going to provide them a massive sense of credibility and overall raise their level of talent, because Bellator's roster unmistakably is much better than PFL's, and if they do a championship event next spring like they talked about, it's going to be a fucking bloodbath for the PFL. But at the same time, having all of that talent under one roof is a major, major deal. Now, right now, the PFL has said they plan to run Bellator as an overseas brand, at the very least for a year. Don Davis, their executive, has said that it could be as long as a year, it could be forever. It just depends on how it goes. Well, whenever it comes to being overseas, Bellator is a popular brand. They do have success there. But let's be honest, more than likely, you're going to end up dropping Bellator as a brand. It's going to be PFL and the UFC going head-to-head in the future moving forward. Now, as I said, can PFL challenge the UFC? Not right now. But at the same time, combining the antitrust lawsuit, combining the fact that they acquired Bellator, and also combining the fact that, again, it's another thing that's not being discussed enough, but Saudi Arabia has a heavy interest in the PFL. It is true that Saudi Arabia does have a deal with the UFC. They are going to bring a fight night event there early next year. But at the same time, the PFL has a much better and more important deal with Saudi Arabia. Earlier this year, Saudi Arabia poured $100 million into the PFL. At the same time, it also came out that they plan to help underwrite and take a lot of the financial burden off of their pay-per-view events moving forward. So, what does that mean? Well, whenever PFL is not going to be the ones bankrolling the pay-per-view events, they can go out and get bigger stars, and they'll have that ability to do that. For example, PFL does not have the money to do Deontay Wilder versus Francis Ngannou in MMA. At the same time, though, with Saudi Arabia taking that burden, guess what? That fight's now a possibility. And let's be honest here, I don't have any inside information, but I'm be willing to bet that Saudi Arabia played a big role in them acquiring Bellator as well. Now, you can take your anger out on the Saudi sports washing and all that. You can argue whether or not it's a good or a bad thing, more than likely the latter. At the same time, though, this is huge for PFL, and it's a very bad thing for the UFC. Because one of the bigger reasons why Bellator failed is simply just a lack of money. They also had a lack of support from Viacom. They were changing providers, they were changing everything on such a consistent basis that it felt like they could never find their footing. They wanted to be the number 2 company, but they also wanted to be the freak show company that hosted Kimbo Slice versus Dada 5000. You know what I'm saying? PFL does not have that problem. For all of their issues in terms of pacing, in terms of the tournament, so on and so forth, they have a defined brand, a defined focus. At the very least, that puts them in the same league as the UFC in terms of literally just having a defined, clear, and focused division. I know that sounds like bottom level stuff, but at the same time, about half the companies at MMA do not have that. So how will this Bellator PFL deal turn out? Will they challenge the UFC? In the end, we'll have to wait and see. But at the same time, combining the fact that these two companies, the number 2 and 3, are getting put together, they already have an ESPN deal. They have a very easy way for people to access them. They have now a massive influx of talent coming at a time whenever they are getting a big financial boost, and the UFC is about to go to federal court to pay out potentially billions of dollars. Like I said, it's a wait and see, but man, it's a good time to be working for the PFL right now. That's all I got for this. If you guys enjoyed this type of video, feel free to drop us a like. Feel free to subscribe to the channel. We're mainly a podcast, and we'll sometimes do these short form videos like this moving forward in the future. So if you went ahead and enjoyed this type of content, feel free to support us. And feel free to follow us on social media at Courtside Soundoff on Twitter /X, at Josh Evanoff for me on Twitter /X as well. Hope you guys enjoyed. Take care.